Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds! Hello, nerds! Hello, nerds! Hello, nerds! Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Welcome back to the show, Aarika. How are you doing?
I'm doing amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, it has been a little while. Last time you were on the show, I think you were just kicking off your campaign. It was still early days. And I remember because I was like, oh, isn't it a little late to start a campaign, for this this cycle? And you're like, no, I'm doing it for 2022.
And then you change, your whole face changed. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I kind of felt bad. I was like, there ain't no way she's going to win with just a few months to announce. But I'm so glad that you are actually the opposite. You're playing really the long game.
Very long game.
And, kind of getting ready for a bit of a marathon. How has it been so far?
Tom, amazing.
Really?
Yes. The campaign has been just taking off in the most amazing ways. Literally, I'm so grateful for my team. I've literally built the dream team, as I like to call them. And we have some really, really dynamic, smart, motivated, creative people working on the team. And they have literally brought us from like nowhere to having over $50,000 in less than 90 days. We have more small dollar donations than the incumbents. We're building name recognition. We're getting some really cool endorsements that are going to come down later on as we get closer to, when the midterms become the priority. So the doors are opening and this girl's walking through them. And funny enough, I got a lot of slack for running the long game and people feeling like, it takes away from the current, candidates and I just want to address this because I think it's really important that running the congressional race is incredibly hard, especially when you're like me or you're a teacher and you're working. And so you need the long game to be able to win. And I think that this is important this has to be said, that we need people in Congress this cycle, but we also need people in Congress the next cycle as well. Especially if Andrew decides that he wants to run again, he's going to need people that advocate for similar policies or these policies. So I want to say for those that think that was a bad idea, it's not. It is actually one of the best things that I feel I could have done for myself and for our movement. So I'm really excited about it. And I'm very grateful to every single person that has donated, has contributed, tweeted out, called friends, phone bank, the people that go out and hit the ground with me. Like, I'm so grateful. But we are playing the long game because that's how I will win. That's what's best for me.
Yeah. And it's also, I would argue, only fair to your supporters and donors that you're going to do everything you can to maximize your chance of winning and getting into Congress. So I don't know. I guess I would respectfully disagree with folks who are critical of you starting early. Look, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And especially if starting early increases your probability of getting, a Yang Gang person into Congress, that's huge. Because we don't need a landslide of Yang Gang entering Congress. We just, we need to get it going. We need a few. And if you're one of those few pioneers, more power to you. What's been most surprising to you going from, oh, I just announced to now, like, okay, I'm out there, I'm raising money, I'm putting together a team. What have you been learning so far?
I've learned a lot of things. I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned a lot about my community. And I think the biggest thing that I learned is that you have to be yourself. You go through this period, like you're a teacher, that's your identity, that's a big part of your life. And now you are entering in a whole nother realm can be mean at times, that's hard. And, every single advisor that I have and my parents, they've always said, just be yourself. Just be yourself. And it seems easier said than done. And there was a moment I'm like, well, I'm a teacher, are people are they going to respond to that? I'm 35. And what I'm realizing the second I through all that, okay, I have to be a certain way, I'm going into politics, then that's when I've been my best self. And so moving forward, it's all about just being myself. And if people like me, great. And if they don't, that sucks for you. Because so that was the biggest thing, is the pressure of having to be someone else. But that's just not, I have to be myself. And then the other thing too is my level of empathy. I knew I was an empathetic person, and I knew I had the emotional and intellectual capability of walking in someone else's shoes. But the more I talk to people, the more I'm like, damn, I'm really empathetic. I'm really able to see where someone else is coming from. And I think that's what makes me a great candidate and a great person to be in Congress. Because just yesterday, I was with the Valley of Change, and we were feeding the homeless. And there was this woman in front of a school sitting literally on the lawn. It was really, just the setting of it was just so sad. Oh. And she had all of her stuff around her in tears. And I go up to her, I give her food, and I talk to her. And I realize she's a victim of domestic violence. She has no place to go. She's illiterate. there was no chance for her. Right. And so we immediately started calling, trying to get her into a hotel, trying to find a shelter. Everything's booked, and she literally says these words: I'm tired of being homeless. And when she said that to me, I had this thought of if I didn't have the family that I had or the education, this could have easily been me. She's only 10 years older than I am. And so I think what I learned in that moment, and sitting in the grass with her and tell her, you got to get up. You can't quit. You have to stay hopeful, is that the policies that we're advocating for are essential. And the candidates and people that we need in Congress and in Washington, not just in Congress, but just elected officials in general, there has to be a level of humanity. We have to have that. It's a non-negotiable at this point. Because if you can't relate to this woman, if you can't sit with her and empathize with her and try to understand where she's coming from, you don't deserve to be in that seat. And so I've been learning the value of being able to relate to people, and why that is probably the biggest thing for me, an elected official going forward. Any elected official or candidate that I align myself with has to have humanity in them. They have to have empathy in them and relatability in them, because those are the people that are going to be motivated to fight for change. They're going to be the people that are going to take risks and have courage to speak to uplift those people in those situations. And so I learned the power of empathy and why that's so significant.
Has there been an instance where that empathy has caused you to evolve your kind of policy views or change the emphasis? Has that happened?
I think it's just put greater attention on them, more urgency on them. Literally after that, I didn't want to cry in front of her because I'm trying to be strong for her, but I literally broke down. I had a moment where I literally broke down, and then it was UBI is urgent, healthcare is urgent, education is urgent, and we really have to fix these things, because if not, we are going to be our own downfall. I was actually registering people experiencing homelessness to vote a couple of weeks ago, and 3 out of every 4 people that I was registering couldn't even read or write. I literally was writing out all of their registration cards for them. And so, it's annoying that Aarika, all she does is talk about education, but it's so important. We want people to be educated, right? We want people to be critical thinkers. We want people to be problem solvers, yet we're not making sure that they can read and write. I can't begin to tell you how many people, adults that I come across just campaigning that are illiterate. It's a real problem, and we have to fight for this. So if anything, it's made these policies that are on my platform and Andrew's platform urgent.
One of the things that I've noticed, even in your example, is that you benefited from very supportive parents, who I'm guessing emphasize the importance of education. I had the same benefit. And, you wonder, like, okay, with the statistics of many, many low income folks growing up without two parents, and even the single parent may not emphasize education, may not be in a position to, like, how do you break that cycle? Because I feel like, with my own kids now, I spend a lot of time with them on their homework and kind of, busting their chops about doing their homework and all this kind of thing. And I'm wondering, like, how does that work where millions of people are growing up without that support? And, how do you break that cycle?
That's such a complex question, and the answer is complex. So obviously UBI would give people a floor to stand on. People wouldn't have to work 2 and 3 jobs, right? It reduces stress and all those things. So if we're just to take UBI off the table, because we already know that would be one solution. I was thinking about this actually not too long ago about what can we do for these kids that don't have that kind of support system. And something that I feel very strongly about is having 2 teachers in a classroom. I think if we have 2 teachers in a classroom, now we have opportunities to work one-on-one. We can have small groups, more attention, and so we can close the gap in that regard. If we can't add a parent to the household, let's add a teacher to the classroom. Let's up the ante on our after-school programs and make sure that there's tutoring available, that we have more adult figures in our school system. That is something I feel very strongly about. It's something that they do at my school. And I can't tell you, it's paid in dividends through distant learning, because we can do a breakout room with a teacher and a student like that. And then that kid can get the support that he needs or she needs. So I think that's a solution. I think changing our curriculum, so the concepts are not as isolated, but they're more married together, I think will help literacy. So for example, if I'm doing a science lesson and there's a math component and a literacy component and they're all married, then we are able to increase comprehension in that regard. So I think for me, how I approach this is being more innovative and imaginative with our curriculum. And also, to another point, to the 2 teachers in the classroom, they will not reduce classroom sizes. For whatever reason, we can't get smaller classroom sizes. So that's another advantage of having another teacher in a classroom. If I can have my way and we can find the funding, 2 teachers plus a TA would even be better. So I think that's a way that we can rectify that 100%.
You teach at an independent school. My kids go to independent school, and I always struggle with that, because as someone who is very happy to have my tax money go to education and public education, I also know that for me, we made a choice that we wanted these really small classes, and we wanted all of this kind of enrichment and kind of additional support that independent school could give our kids. Do you struggle with a little bit of you're pro public education, but you are part of a independent school kind of setup as well? Like, does that make it hard for you to reconcile, or how do you think about that?
It definitely pulls on my heartstrings. And I'm going to be honest, like I believe in being honest. I am a 1 income household. I'm not married, so in order to be able to live, I had to make that tough decision. But I rectify it by, when Andrew was running, campaigning for him and fighting for these policies that I know would benefit kids at public school. Running for office is another way that I'm rectifying that. When you go into education, you obviously want to help, kids that are, in these unfortunate circumstances. And you want to do right by them. That's really important. But I also think people don't understand this in an independent school. Those kids have issues as well. And I think there's great value in having a woman of color in an independent school, because I am able to bring a perspective that they probably wouldn't get, or teach empathy, teach compassion, pop the bubble a little bit. So I think that there's great value in that. Like, for example, 2 years ago, we taught slavery. We taught, the truth of slavery. We did a whole unit, and my aunt actually participated in it, but we did a whole unit on slavery from beginning to end that led up to the Civil Rights Movement and the Children's March. And that was great value. And they wouldn't have gotten that maybe if I wasn't in their classroom necessarily. And also, too, we've collaborated with schools that are public schools and kids that come from a different demographic. And I'm able to extend the classroom to the real world setting. And I have other teachers in my class that have done field trips to really low income areas like Watts and talk about the Watts Towers, and they make a point to talk about influential Black leaders. And so I do think that there is value for me to be in an independent school, but it is hard to be pro public school and working at an independent school. And people might say, like, oh, she's a hypocrite. No, I have to pay bills too. Like, I have to be able to survive. And I also need creative freedom. There's a lot of creative freedom that comes with being in an independent school that you don't necessarily get in a public school. And my big objective was always to show what can be done when teachers have resources and they're able to use their imagination and be creative. And that's what I'm going to bring to Washington, is like, I've done it. We need to bring this to our public schools. And so I think that's what makes me an advocate for teachers as well.
What's your take on the argument that is often talked about by Betsy DeVos, which is like, hey, we should just let people pick what school their kids go to. They should get vouchers. And, hey, if someone wants to go to the school that you teach at, they should have the right to do that. They shouldn't have to pay, tens of thousands of dollars out of their pocket.
School choice is a very interesting thing. Like, let's say we had school choice and we allow all these kids, like, let's say we have 2 schools, right? And we allow all of our, let's say, our high functioning students transfer out. Then we have a school with, it changes the whole demographic. It changes the whole socioeconomic. I don't feel like it sets those kids up for success. Now we're asking parents to drive further. I think we should just make our schools better. I think we should make sure that teachers have the resources that they need. Parents should have to make that choice in the first place, but we can't also have all of our kids leaving and then we have, kids that are quote unquote not performing at grade level. It's dysfunction. It's complete dysfunction. So I'm not for school choice. I won't advocate for that. I'm advocating to make our schools better, and we can, and we should.
Yeah. Well, I know we're throwing a lot of hot potatoes out there, but that
is a hot potato, Tom.
It's the nerd zone. So let's keep it real. Here's another one for you.
Okay. You
talked about the need for independence and the freedom to kind of innovate in your classroom, because I totally agree with that. I think every teacher's kind of like an entrepreneur in a way.
Yes, that's a great
and so, but there are people who feel that the current teacher unions don't allow for as much flexibility in a public school environment. And it's sometimes it's just for good reasons, and sometimes it like protects the status quo. Like, what's your take on do the unions have any role in how we've gotten here, or how can they help us, improve? Because as a person who believes in worker rights, I support, the freedom to organize. But if it gets to a point where the end customer, the student, is not getting the innovation that the teacher wants to give, to me, that feels like a very uncomfortable place. I'm curious what your thoughts were.
Okay. Really fast. Just want to say one quick thing about Betsy DeVos. We have someone in education that's, making these really important decisions that doesn't go to these schools. She doesn't visit these schools. So for her to advocate on something that she doesn't know is why she's unfit to be in that position in the first place. So I just want to make sure that that's said. She's advocating for school choice, but she doesn't really understand. I bet you if I asked her, what's the first thing you need to do to teach a kid to read, she probably wouldn't be able to answer that question. Yet she cuts our reading programs. So I just want to put that out there that I don't think she's fit to make judgments on education. But going back to what you're saying about teacher unions, I think that teachers have to be protected. I think that there has to be a level of protection, teacher rights and all that kind of stuff. But I do think the conversation's worth having. And we are ranked low out of all the, industrial countries, the modernized countries, and our kids are performing poorly on math, science, reading, etc. At what point, as a union, do we say, like, this isn't working, maybe we should try something else? And listen to teachers. I feel like we as teachers need to speak up and say, okay, you're a union, but this is what we want now. I think that's what I would like to see happen more. But I would never go against the teachers union. Obviously, that's, they do a lot of good, but there are some things I definitely don't agree with. But we have to make sure that as teachers that are in the union, I'm not a part of the teachers union, but because I work at an independent school, but we have to give teachers the opportunity to advocate for the things that they need. And we need the teacher union to hear those things, because what we have right now is not always working for kids. And we have to put kids first. I think that's something that's really missing in our education system. It has to be about the kids.
Let me ask you.
Status quo. I'm sorry, one more thing. I don't like the status quo necessarily. I don't think if something's not working, and we're seeing it time and time and time again, we have to go a different route. We have to try something new. And so the standardized testing, for example, memorizing, just teaching to a test, that doesn't work for kids. So we need to stop that. We need to make sure that we're not pushing standardized testing. My school that I'm working at currently, they don't push standardized testing down kids' throats. And our kids are creative, imaginative, and they're able to think outside the box. If anything, standardized tests stress kids out. They don't measure the whole child. And I know a bunch of young people that I've met with that hate having to study for the SAT and the ACT, and that their whole future is measured on how they do on a Saturday morning. I don't think that that's fair. I'm for that.
Totally agree. I mean, one example, and I don't know if this is like a caricature of teachers unions or if this is the real thing. But one example I often hear is that, Aarika, you're very talented. I can tell, like, if my kids were, had you as a teacher, I'm sure they would love you and they would learn a ton from you.
Thank you.
And I have to believe that if you were in an independent school, you would be compensated well, but also like you'd have room for advancement. You'd get like continuous training to kind of upgrade your skills and stay on the cutting edge. And similarly, if you had a colleague who was doing a terrible job and the students were not learning and the parents were not really thrilled with the results, the school would have the flexibility to say, okay, Mr. X, like, you're probably not working out, like we're going to have to, move on. And my understanding is that kind of decision where you reward high performing teachers and teachers who are not meeting the standard or meeting expectations are able to move out, like, that's very hard to do in a public school.
It's very hard. It's very hard to get rid of a bad teacher in a public school. And it's unfortunate because I look at it like it's an honor and a privilege to be teaching those kids. And every kid that walks into a classroom deserves the absolute best. Because to me, literacy and math skills, science skills, all those skills that come with being in school, that's a human right. They deserve to be able to read and write. I'm learning that, like, I'm seeing that now as adults. I'm coming across so many people that are really, truly illiterate, right? So I do think that there needs to be some level of reform, but it's a very difficult thing to get passed with the teachers union. It's really hard to remove a bad teacher. And so I look at it like this. If you know you're not doing right by kids, and you know that this isn't for you, because teaching's not for everybody. And even though I might be adored by a lot of parents and kids, I've had parents that maybe don't like my style, or kids that didn't really gravitate towards my style because I have high expectations. I'm very hands-on and they want the traditional route. But I say all that to say, I would hope that a teacher that realized, like, you know what, this isn't for me, I'm not doing right by these kids, would have the integrity to just remove themselves from the classroom. That's what I would like. That's what I would like.
I would like that too. I guess, you know, human nature is sometimes people don't realize that they're not performing, or they might realize they're not performing, but they got to pay their bills and they're not eager to become unemployed.
Then go into admin.
I should call out.
Sometimes bad teachers make great administrators.
Oh God, yeah, that's true. That's like managers and corporations. Mrs. Jones is a teacher, and she wants to emphasize that she works in a public school, I believe, and she's saying, hey, we do get rid of people. We do it all the time. You know, you're put on a growth plan. And I think our conversation is not that it never happens, but it's probably easier to make changes rapidly with less rules and regulations that a union probably has.
You're an at-will. Like, so if you are at an independent school, you're an at-will employee, and they can cut you for whatever reason. You're wearing blue, okay, whatever. So first of all, Mrs. Jones, thanks for being a teacher. And you know, there's different ways that teachers look at education, and that's fine. That's completely fine. But it is true that it is harder to remove a teacher from a public school than an independent school.
All right. Well, since this interview, we're not there's no sacred cows. Let's talk about another really controversial thing. I noticed that I think you were pretty active in the Black Lives Matter kind of movement and kind of protests and awareness in the early days. And I've observed, I am as well. I've also observed that the Trump administration has really focused everyone's attention more on the riots and looting than on the peaceful protests. And I was kind of curious, like, what's your take? Because if I were a peaceful protester, I would be kind of pissed about the looters and rioters kind of like being counterproductive. Like, I worry a little bit that activity actually will advance the re-election of Donald Trump, who, in my opinion, is no friend to you know, people of color or lower income folks. What's your take on how this is playing out?
I don't like Trump, and I just really feel it's important to vote and to plan to vote early, because he's going to keep doing what he's doing. And the way we use our voice is at the ballot, you know, and get him out. In terms of, I'm not for rioting and looting, as everyone, if you know me, you know that that's not something that I promote or think is okay and acceptable. And it does frustrate me in the sense that there are people like the Valley of Change, like who I go out with, you know, and they're literally out there every single day. The girl's been, Latora, she's been there for 105 days yesterday. So today makes 106. And that gets obviously no media coverage and talking about the impact she's having on our community, right? And so I don't expect Trump to pay attention to something that's positive. Like, why would he do that? He's not about positivity. He's about divisiveness. So I feel like American people, for the most part, are sick of it. And I think people, even if they're reluctantly voting for Biden, they're going to vote for Biden, because I think people have had enough. But with the Black Lives Movement, we have other people emerging to show what leadership is, like the NBA, the WNBA, our tennis stars. So I think that no one, at least I know, views Trump as a leader. So I just ignore him. He's so not even a factor in my thoughts. The only time I talk about Trump is if someone asks me about Trump. I rarely bring the dude up. Like he's a loser. Like in my mind, he's like.
I feel you.
I cannot. And
yeah.
If my dad, I'm sorry, I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
I was watching the RNC convention, the Republican convention.
Yeah.
And I listened to Ivanka's speech. And I was like, if that were my dad, I would be humiliated. There's no way that I would get up there and be able to glorify my dad if he behaved like that. And so I just want to say, like, Trump is also not like what Andrew says. He's a symptom of a lot of problems that we have to address too, but he's just a horrible, horrible leader. And I really wish his family and people around him would say, like, okay, enough is enough. Like, enough. Like, if that was my dad, I'd be like, Dad, stop. Like, you're extra right now. Like calm down. Like, this is not like, at what point do people around him just say stop? You know, it's disgusting.
Yeah. I often reflect how so many of the lessons that we try to teach our kids in the Nerds household, like respect, empathy, accountability, honesty, integrity, follow through, grit. We don't see any of those characteristics in the Oval Office. And it's like either we're teaching our kids the wrong thing, or we have a very sort of unprepared and inappropriate person in the highest office in the land. On the other hand, I will say that a lot of people are not jumping up and down about Biden-Harris. What's your take on that ticket?
You know, we need ranked choice voting, so we're not in this predicament. And I noticed on Twitter you've been doing that really to show, which I appreciate, that you're modeling the beauty of ranked choice voting. So we need ranked choice voting, but I am voting for Biden. I'm going to be happy to cast my vote for Biden, and I'm going to tell you why. So when I was campaigning for Andrew in New Hampshire, I was at a Walmart in Trump country, and I met this woman who was cashing in her change at Coinstar. Literally cashed, like, she was like, I guess she gathered whatever change, and she literally cashed it at Coinstar so she can pay a bill and be able to feed her daughter. And I said to her, you should really consider voting for Andrew Yang in the primary, because then I started telling her about universal basic income, because we would never have to be in this situation ever again if we had a universal basic income. Long story short, if you were to present this story to both Biden and Trump, who's going to be more empathetic? Biden. Trump doesn't have the capacity to relate or be empathetic to the woman cashing in change just so she could pay a bill and feed her daughter. And so I'm going to roll with empathy and the ability to relate over not being able to, right? So Trump sees us dying, Black people dying due to police brutality. He does nothing. He doesn't care that soybeans are rotting in Iowa. He doesn't care that kids are illiterate. There are just things that he just does not care about. And so I'm happy to vote for Biden. And what people don't understand too is that with a Biden administration comes potentially Andrew in that administration, comes a new Secretary of Education, a whole team of people that are actually very impactful. I was just on a panel with some people that work for Biden and former President Obama last Friday. And she was saying that people don't really understand that the people that work in the administration make some of the biggest decisions ever. And so it's not just the top of the ticket, it's the people that he brings on. So it's the top of the ticket, but it's also the people he asked to be in his administration that's helping. And I also feel like, aside from Biden, we need to turn the Senate. We need keep the Congress, the House of Representatives, so we can get bills passed. Mitch McConnell you already know how I feel about Mitch. But he's really got to go. It looks like Lindsey Graham might lose his seat, which is amazing. And so I just feel like I'm happy to cast my vote for Biden. I would never vote for Trump in a million years. But in the future, maybe we'd have ranked choice voting, so we wouldn't be in this predicament. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, your point about this election is not just about Donald Trump, but it's also about Team Trump versus what might be Team Biden. And you think about folks like Bill Barr, another 4 years of Bill Barr as Attorney General, or like we talked about Betsy DeVos,
right?
Or you got HHS, where Health and Human Services apparently is kind of really getting more involved in CDC reporting about virus and sort of scientific reports. EPA, like these are all crucial
and
roles.
Our Supreme Court, we have a judge. We have a judge
that's
appointed. We can potentially have an all conservative Supreme Court, and that means that Roe v. Wade is completely vulnerable. So I think that we have to think about the vote, the gravity of the vote, and it's not just a Biden-Trump thing. It's like social stuff, our values, and what we want for our country. And I'm tired of Trump's America because it doesn't reflect my values or the way that I was raised, and I no longer want to be a part of it, to be honest.
So you and I, it sounds like we both watched at least parts of the RNC convention. I was struck by how many Black speakers there were. And and I was like, whoa, look at this. Yeah. And I was thinking I was curious how you viewed it. Like I was watching with my son, and he was saying, he's 12. He was like, I wonder what % of Black people support Trump, because it looks like there's so many on the stage. And I was like, yeah, that's called selection bias. They basically have found a bunch of people trying to kind of represent that the Trump nation is really diverse. But if you look at the kind of statistically significant polls, it doesn't reflect that. On the other hand, I could see people being persuaded, because you got to give Trump credit. I do think the criminal justice reform, in terms of reducing these mandatory long sentences, I think that was we got to give him some credit for that. What's your take on how Trump has done for Black America?
Horrible. I think he's been horrible. And Black America, I look at it like we are part of the United States of America too. Mm-hmm. And I am not just my skin color. I am not just my gender. I pay taxes. I'm a citizen, and all we are asking for, as if we're going to play the African American card, and I'm half Asian too, but if we're going to do this, just treat us equally, and the thing is, we try to do that. We're not, we're not less than. And I think what pisses me off more than anything is that Trump allows this perception that he is doing all this stuff for us, but he does, in a very subliminal way, make us feel like we're less than, and we're not. He knows how to whistle call his base and whip up all that hate. In my community, in my district, there were a whole team of Trump supporters that came to the Black Lives Matter, and they did a parade around the block and everything. And there was a shooting or something. And it's that's not doing anything for us. That does nothing for the Black community, right? So we're gonna just isolate ourselves. But I feel like when he asked all these different Black speakers to come and speak, it was, I was literally watching with my head turned. I was very disappointed in Tim Scott, who actually, when I was campaigning for Andrew, I asked to have a meeting with him. I did. I asked to have a meeting with him because I believe in working across the aisle, and it's okay if you're Black and conservative, because that's not an issue, right? But I was very disappointed for him to reduce the problems that we're experiencing as African Americans, and uplifting his voice, like giving, like just allowing Trump to say, like, see, I have a Black friend. Like I have a token, like my tokens here. I didn't like that. I wish they would have said, no, we're not going to, or say, or use that moment, like, we don't support Trump, or like say, or say something like that. Not that they would ever do it, but I was so frustrated by their speeches, and how they're pretty much saying that Trump is for Black people, and he's not. He's not.
Yeah, I mean, there were so Scott obviously knew what he was doing. He made a decision, based on his own criteria. There were some Black speakers featured in videos that were not aware that they were going to be used in the RNC convention. I think there was a case where they interviewed a bunch of folks in public housing, and they interviewed them for like 4 hours, and then created this like 2-minute montage. And they were later, I think 3 out of the 4 Black women were not aware that they were being used in this kind of campaign video. But yeah, I think hopefully all voters will turn out this November, because back in 2016 the turnout was okay, but it wasn't like it was in 12 and 8. And so I suspect if we get everyone in America who's eligible to vote, the outcome will be very clear. I worry a little bit that people will not turn out. I mean, do you feel like the turnout's going to happen?
Well, with voter suppression, it's going to make it more difficult, which is why we have to make sure people know how to vote and plan early and all that kind of stuff. But I think where Black people get frustrated is that they vote Democratic and they don't see results. They don't see their life impacted in any way, right? And where we fail sometimes, I think, as Democrats, is messaging. I don't think that we're giving people a vision that they can get excited about. We're not speaking truth, and that's part of the problem, and what I try to encourage people to do is get involved in your local elections, your local government, because it actually impacts you more profoundly. And that's where most of the real change happens, at the local level. And I think we need to educate people on that. But I don't think turnout's going to be this massive thing. I worry sometimes that, Biden's not delivering the message well. I do worry about that. Like, can you name 5 of his policies off the top of your head?
I can, because I've done videos about it. Okay. But I know most people
can name 5 policies like off the top of their head.
No, the average voter is not familiar with Biden's policies. He does publish them on his site. They are available for people.
It's just communicating it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. I hear you. I think his
good education policy, like he's very pro community college and, treat like vocational schools and stuff like that. But I say all that to say, like, the average person can't just riff off 5 of his policies. But if you ask like a Bernie supporter or a Yang supporter or Elizabeth Warren supporter, Pete Buttigieg, even, people can say like, oh, they're for da 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 da.
Yeah. Yeah. That hasn't been Biden's narrative. I think his is all about, Trump. Character of the country. And
I wish he would stop tweeting about Trump and start tweeting his vision for America.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a game changer for him. If he could just take out the word, remove it from his vocabulary, and just, what are you going to do and how are you going to do it, and get us excited? I think that's where he should go. If I was advising him, that's what I would tell him. Like, for example, I'll use my campaign. For example, like, I'm going up against an incumbent who is working towards being the chair of foreign affairs, I want to say. you will rarely ever hear me like talk about him because I'm so busy talking about my vision for our district and what I would love to see at the national level, that he's not a factor because it's not about him, it's about people. And I think if Biden can get that messaging across, I think he will get people out to vote. He will get people to feel like, okay, maybe my vote won't be a waste this time. Maybe I'm not voting between the less of the two evils. And I don't even, right? So I think as Democrats in general, we have to figure out the messaging. And talking about Trump every 5 seconds is not it.
I agree. I would love to see every week if Biden had a video where he had a conversation with someone who he's, might potentially be on his cabinet, and they talk about a specific policy area and dive deep. It doesn't mean that Biden needs to turn into a policy wonk, but he could kind of showcase the types of people that he respects. So he could talk to Yang about poverty or about, economic kind of transformation of the economy. He could talk to, like an Inslee about the environment. He could talk to a Buttigieg about military service or whatever topics are of interest. That would be fantastic, because then we would also get a sense of like what Team Biden could look like, and get away from I think we all know that Trump is just, everybody's made their decision about whether Trump is good or bad. So we don't need any more information from Biden about that, but we do need something to vote for as well.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think someone in the chat even said it's like voting against someone. And I think that's unfortunate, and I agree with that. I think it was Tamar. Yeah. So we have to create that vision, and we have to fix the messaging. But I also feel like with where we are right now in our country, people need a sense of hope. Like, we are going to get through this. And he has the opportunity right now to speak to the emotions of what people are going through, relate to what people are going through, and more importantly, tell them how he's going to get us out of it. Because at the end of the day, Trump's base is going to turn out. They always do. They always show up for him. And if Biden cannot get the emotions going, like, okay, I'm excited of, okay, now I can get behind him, then it's going to be like, and that's what we don't need.
What was your reaction to Harris getting the VP slot? I mean, you're in California, you're a person of color, you're a woman. I could see a lot of reasons why you're like, yeah, Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Before I came across Andrew Yang, I was actually a Kamala Harris supporter, and I was really excited about her, and then I came across Andrew, and I obviously went that direction. But, I don't agree with every decision that she's made, especially with criminal justice. However, I do think that you have to give people room to evolve and to make mistakes. No one's perfect, right? And I think to want a perfect elected official is a little bit weird. You're never going to get that. But I did see her step up in the pandemic. She was advocating for a $2,000 reoccurring payment. She was updating people on what to do and advocating for testing and all these things. And I was really impressed by her. And I'm actually supposed to be meeting with her and Biden, I think at the end of the month. I want to, or early next month. And so I will be asking her a little bit more about those decisions. But what I love mostly about Kamala Harris is her willingness to listen and evolve. I'm always looking for someone that, like, I don't know it all and I'm imperfect, but I'm willing to learn and I'm willing to grow and I'm willing to admit fault. And I think those are qualities in her that I really do like. And I don't want to take away from this historical moment, like she is the first, or I think she's the first Black woman on for VP. I think that's a historical moment. I don't want to take that away from her. And I think that's really great because she's basically breaking down the ceilings for people. Like little girls are seeing that, like, oh my God, I could be president. I could be a vice president. And we want to cultivate the next generation of leaders. We want to inspire kids that the representation matters, right? Like, oh my God, that could be me. you know. So I do think that that's a wonderful thing, and I'm excited for her. I am really excited for her, and she has my support.
Yeah. You mentioned there was some Warren support in your district back in the primaries. Was Warren pretty popular, or?
Yeah, she was fairly
Yeah.
popular. Yeah, actually, someone on my team was a big Warren supporter. Actually, yeah.
So not scientific, but as you mentioned, I did a little experiment with a ranked choice voting kind of like faux ballot, and let me share my screen here. So I basically, it was an open ballot, so there were Republicans and Democrats on this. And it was just sort of a way for me also to kind of get a feel for how the dynamics of RCV works. So let me just show, let me caveat this by saying this is a Twitter poll. It is not representative. There's all kinds of self-selection bias in who participates. Yeah. But it was more just to get a feel for how the calculations work. What you see here is in round one, probably because a lot of Yang supporters also like kind of outside thinkers like Gabbard. So Gabbard actually got more votes than anyone in the first round. But obviously she doesn't have over 50%. So what happens is the calculations continue. You only vote once. You fill out like this big ballot one time, and then you start eliminating the weakest candidates round after round after round. I'll kind of advance to like here in this round 13, you have Howie Hawkins getting eliminated, and then his going to people who wanted Howie often put Williamson and Bernie next on their choices, so then they got reallocated. And then you have Buttigieg getting knocked out, a lot of his people going to Bernie, a little bit going to Biden. Then you have Jurgensen, some going to Romney and Warren. But basically, when you skip to the end, you have Warren getting more votes than anyone else. Like, we could have advanced this. I had it stop at the top three. But I think a lot of Williamson people would have gone to Warren, and she would have been like 40-something%.
Yeah.
The cool thing about this is that Warren ended up number one after the reallocations. But when you started, she was number 3, which goes to show you that, like, sometimes, like, the current system rewards the most extreme support for, one-off candidates. But there is like a middle ground person that everybody could be cool with, that maybe they put the Warren as number 2 or 3 or 4. Yeah. And that would probably be a better outcome. Like, you almost wish, like, I bet there are some Republicans out there who wish they had RCV, before Trump was elected, because he probably, as we know, was not a top choice for a lot of Republicans. What do you think? Have you seen any kind of movement towards ranked choice in Southern California? Like, are you hearing people talk about it? Because it seems really promising, but it's also a hard concept to explain.
It is a hard concept to explain. It's on my platform. When I talk to people, and I talk to people all the time, I'll bring it up when they bring up the less of the two evils, and then I'll bring it up. But I think because it's so, one, I think people just have a lot on their mind, so they're not really trying to stretch themselves to the picture, something like this. But people don't really talk about it. To answer your question very honestly. Yeah. I think I've met 2 people that love the idea of ranked choice voting. I just don't think it's the time right now for it to really take off in the way that I would love for it to take off. I think right now people are just getting acquainted with UBI, right? And learning more about that. I think people are at their capacity. So I think I just haven't met a lot of people that are excited about ranked choice voting. And I mind you, this is off of Twitter. There's a whole world outside of Twitter. And so, like, very politically active, obviously, on Twitter, and you're following all the people, right? So we're in our bubble. But when you step outside of your bubble, people have other things that they are worried about and concerned about. And ranked choice voting is just not the number one issue for most people.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I kind of feel like ranked choice voting, it's a little bit like Bitcoin. Like if people really are into it, like they feel like it has like game-changing potential, but it takes like hours to kind of like work it. It's a little bit like if it's hard to explain UBI, my God, try explaining RCV to someone.
Yeah.
So I get that. I do worry that, let's say you make it to Congress, like the system does not reward you. It will not reward you for coming up with kind of common sense proposals that both parties can support. The system will punish you for doing that.
Why do you think that? Why do you think that?
Because when you come up for re-election, if you were seen as being too moderate or not really hardcore progressive enough, you would get a primary challenge on your left. And the way that you get on the ballot for each party is you got to win the primary. Like nobody, in a way, like I think that happened to Yang. Like Yang probably would have done better in a general than he did in the Democratic Party primaries.
Okay.
And so that's why I think RCV is nice, because then if you do appeal to a broader range of people, if you have a combination of RCV and an open primary, then like you actually reward people that serve the most citizens. Do you worry at all, or what's your take on how you stay true to your core values, but also secure the nomination within the party? Because like, as an example, we started this conversation talking about teachers unions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like if you ask a mainstream voter, they would be like, yeah, teachers unions are good, but there's probably extremes and we need to kind of like make sure there's flexibility for schools. But if you said that in a Democratic primary debate, they would probably say, oh, she's anti-union.
Which is, people can take what you say out of context, or maybe I need to be a more effective communicator or whatnot. But the one thing, when we started this conversation with, I'm going to be myself, 100%. I'm not running for corporations. I'm not running for, any other reason, but for everyday people. And that's what keeps me going, is really advocating and doing what I feel is best for people and putting people first. And I think because I'm running for those reasons, I will get rewarded. I'll just use like AOC for an example, right? Like she's literally like, regardless of how you feel about her policy wise, the girl really stands behind what she believes in, and she's still standing, and so I'm hoping that will be my scenario as well. And I think that people in my district, from what I'm learning, they like me and they like, they may not agree. I have people that don't agree with all of my policies, but because I'm willing to listen, because even though they're Republican, or they're very, very far left, they like the fact that I will listen and that I'm honest and I speak truth. So I think that in Washington, I'm not going to change. I'm going to be myself. And I think that's the problem with politicians in general, is, they're trying to always score these political points. And it's always at the expense of us, Tom. It's always at the expense of us, just to keep that seat. And I'll tell you, this is how I really feel, if we're going to be very honest. I feel like people that are getting corporate PAC money from the banks, and all these special interest money, and they're not even talking to people, don't deserve to be in that seat. They don't deserve it. And I think people are really sick and tired of this kind of mentality and buying their food and just playing politics. I'm so over political points. I'm not trying to impress anyone in Washington. If I'm trying to impress anyone, it's the students in my classroom or former students that's like, wow, my teacher made it to Congress. Like, those are the people that I want to impress. Like the working class people. And I feel like we need to have more people to speak up to that power, because we can't be afraid to be courageous. My dad was just telling me the other day, someone told me to quit, actually. Someone told me that I should drop out. And I called my dad. I was like, Dad, someone told me I should quit. And he goes, you know what, Aarika? you fight to the very, very end. And when you're in Washington, you keep fighting and you don't stop fighting, you know? And so I don't know if I'm answering your question fully. I don't know if I'm
you are.
I don't know if I'm going on a rant, but I just am so sick of the establishment controlling every little decision that's not even benefiting us. It's not benefiting the woman that I just sat on the grass with yesterday for 30 minutes trying to get her to a shelter. Those policies are not working for us anymore. And it is time that we are leaders and the new voices are heard, the ones that have been ignored. Our voices should be heard. And that is why I'm running. You have to be a little bit crazy to run for Congress in the first place. But damn, if you actually get there and then you get silent, shame on you. Shame on me if I were to make it to Washington and then I decided to fold. Shame on me. So I kind of went on a little bit of a rant because I get very passionate about this, but it's not about anything more than doing the right thing, having a moral compass, and being for people. I really, really believe that. And luckily for me, I'm being heard. And a part of the reason why I'm being heard is because I listen to people. I actually take the time to listen. Someone on my team, literally yesterday, I was talking to this woman. We're like, Aarika, you did more than any politician I've ever seen. And I was like, because I'm a regular person and I can relate. Because there's been a time, and I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be very vulnerable right now. There's been a time where I've only had $20 in my bank account. I know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. And if, let's say my dad, who had a stroke when I was 17, let's say he didn't make it. I'm going to get emotional. Let's say my dad didn't make it. That could have been me. Because if anyone's going to look after me in this world, it is my dad. And so when I think of healthcare, I think of the people that don't have it. Because luckily my dad had healthcare and he was able to survive that stroke. And so if you are in Washington and you cannot advocate for these human rights, in my opinion, it's like, get the F out. Get out. Let someone that's gonna be motivated by people to fight for it. And I think that's what we need in Washington. And that's why I'm running, you know? I have probably a lot, like, it seems sometimes that it's impossible because of who I'm running against and he's there for 20 something years, right? But I do feel like in this moment, with Black Lives Matter, with COVID and education being exposed and the injustices that are happening, there's a pocket for an Aarika Rhodes in Congress right now. And I'm taking it. And and when I get there, I'm gonna do the right thing. Because I think being a real leader is leading by example. And we don't have that. So I went on a tangent, but that's really how I feel.
No, I love it. I love it, Aarika. I mean, you're putting it all out there. Let me ask you as a thought exercise. Let's fast forward. And I know people running for office hate hypotheticals, but I actually find hypotheticals like a legitimate way to understand a person's thought process. Mm-hmm. So let me give you a hypothetical, and then you could refuse to answer it if you want. But hypothetically, let's say you're in Congress, you win. And now we're voting on some crucial bill, like maybe it's the 2021 COVID stimulus bill or the COVID-20 or whatever crisis affects us. And there's a way to give people help and to really move the needle. But it will require some compromise with the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. And the bill before you, either, let's say, provides more direct assistance, but caps the growth of existing entitlement programs or something like that.
Say that last part again. Sorry.
Yeah. So let's say the bill maybe provides more direct assistance, something like a basic income, but then caps the growth of other entitlement programs. And one of your advisors says, Aarika, if you vote for this in the primary, in 2 years, they're going to say you worked with the Republicans to cut, Social Security or cut Medicare. irrespective of what the bill really says. You can't vote for this. You have to be against it. And then another advisor says, but if you vote against it, like nothing's going to get done. We're going to be in gridlock, and people are not going to get aid or help. Like that's an example where I think really well-minded, well-intentioned people struggle because they're like, well, if I get primaried, then I won't be here and I can't do anything after that. But if I don't vote for this, then we're not going to get anything done, and we're just going to be pointing fingers at each other forever. How do you think about that?
It's something that my team and I talk about all the time, that there's going to be these, what you just said, these really, really sticky situations. But I am not a career politician and I'm not just doing things to keep a seat. And so any decision that I make is going to be what's in the best interest of the people in my district. And it's always thinking about it long term and short term. And you had Tim Ryan on, right? And who is someone that I'm growing to like. Especially what really got me about him was after watching him on your channel, to be honest. But anyway, he talks about this. Like he talks about the difficulties like that people are like their representative is put in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I would like to think that I will develop just like him, a strong enough relationship with people in my district that if I have to make a hard decision, they'll know, you know what, she's still looking after us. Because best believe I will be on the floor laying in with a speech of why this might be a really crappy situation that we're put in to have to choose. Or I think that this is the other thing too. I don't think it's a bad thing to work across the aisle. I think we need to be able to work across the aisle. And I think when you are a teacher and you're constantly trying to get kids to work together and have strategies to do that, I think that that's an asset, and I think that would be a compliment to be able to say I can work across the aisle. But every decision that I make will always be in the best interest of everyday working class people and children. Never billionaires, never the top 1% and big corporations, never ever. It will always be for people.
Well, Aarika, it's always a pleasure having you in the Nerd Zone. I always enjoy and I appreciate your willingness to talk openly and directly about stuff that are hard. They're hard trade-offs, and
until you ask hard questions, which I'm appreciative. I'm very grateful for that because people don't understand how hard it is to run for Congress. There's so much that you have to know, and so am I perfect? No. Do I have all the answers? No. But I do really try my best, and I'm learning as much as I can, and I'm really, really taking this seriously. And how I feel today on a position might evolve as I acquire more information or knowledge. So we need to make sure that people understand that no one's perfect and we're all a work in progress. But you asking the hard questions, you should ask the hard questions. People's lives are at stake. So it's good that you're doing that. And I think that it's good for me as, someone that's running to be forced to answer them, because I want to be a candidate that can answer questions. Honestly, people want truth. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah. One last question for you. Sure. As someone who's, a very prominent yang ganger running for Congress, what advice would you have for other people in the audience now who are like, hey, maybe I should run? What would you tell them to help them either make the decision or B, if they've already decided to run, like to kind of, get a good start?
My advice, if you want to run for office or any political or any thing, local could be, a council member, whatever, play the long game. Play the long game. I got a lot of slack for it, but it's beneficial because having relationships with people in your district is really, really important, and to build trust and for them to know that you are in this with them for the long haul, I think speaks volumes. And so the first thing is to do the long game, because that's how you increase your chances of not only winning, but making a difference. Because at the end of the day, you're spending years talking about policies and educating them along the way. Like I'm actually going to be starting to do webinars with people in my district to educate them on UBI and why I'm advocating for it and how we can rectify homelessness and et cetera, education, whatnot. So that's the first thing. Second thing is you cannot allow people that say mean things to you affect you. You know, at first, like people would say mean things to me and I would be like, oh, you know, but now I'm like, you know what? I know who I am. I know why I'm running and I know my moral compass. I know the values that my parents, you know, instilled in me and I'm proud of who I am. I like my character. And so if someone says mean things, ignore them. And then the third thing is, yes, fundraising is a huge part. It's incredibly, incredibly hard. It's so hard to raise money and people don't understand how expensive it is to run for Congress. Like, yes, I've raised a little over 50,000, but we need 3 million. We need $3 million to win. And it seems impossible, but it's not, you know? And so don't let money scare you from running. You know, do not do that because, and whatever you don't have in money, make up in passion, make up with people and voters, you know, make it up with phone banking and door knocking, you know, because I don't have a lot of money. So what I do is, you know, I don't have a lot of money, but I can walk 4 miles. I've been on the phone with like Jeannie, you know, I'm literally like hanging up door hangers and stuff. Like I find a way. You just have to find a way. And if you want it bad enough, you'll do it. And my last advice, run for the right reasons. You know, don't do it for clout. Don't do it for, you know, a blue check mark or whatever. Or I don't even know how much you make if you're in Congress, but run for the right reasons. Really run because you care about people. Because that's what we need in government. People that actually care. And so those would be my that's my advice.
Love it. Any parting thoughts or calls to action for people before we wrap up?
Of course. So again, thank you for having me. Donate to my campaign. Obviously, we need money, but follow my Instagram, Aarika for Congress. We're almost at 500 followers, which is awesome. And this would be awesome is if you guys can sign up for my newsletter. So every month, the first of the month, we send out a newsletter updating people with what's going on in the campaign. And it's really helpful to have people show up and support. Like we're doing some really innovative, dope things. So if you could sign up for the newsletter, that would be amazing. And I appreciate all the support. And if people also too, that they don't necessarily agree with me, I also encourage people to take the time to understand where someone else is coming from. You know, I think there's value in that. So if you don't agree with everything, talk to me about it, say why, and let's have a conversation. So those would be my call to action.
Love
Instead
it.
of putting it down, like, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Well, Aarika, I think you're off to a great start. I think, as you mentioned, it's going to be a long slog to get there, but you're definitely giving yourself enough time, and it looks like you're getting really good traction early on, which is fantastic. So
very good traction.
Yeah, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and with that, we'll say
goodbye,
nerds.
I have a question.
Go for it. Yeah,
you never said what you thought about my campaign so far, though. I wanted to ask you.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Well, I think I've always found your energy and kind of the vibe you give off to be like your best weapon. Like you're very positive and you're very genuine. Like I don't feel like you're just saying stuff, you know, because you think it sounds good. I feel like you're speaking from the heart. I also, I know this sounds weird, but maybe as a dad, I appreciate that you're appreciative of your parents and your family. I can relate to that. So I think as a person, fantastic. I think the areas that are too early to tell are going to be the bank account. As you mentioned, like it's probably a $2-3 million district. That is tough. That's a lot of money to raise.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you don't need to do that, you know, in the primaries, but you're going to need to get, you're going to need to raise some serious money.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing is just really expanding the robustness of the policy positions. Obviously, UBI like the back of your hand. And I was so glad that we could talk more about education in this one. And maybe since your election will be a little while, we'll get you back on and do another deep dive into another area, like criminal justice or environment or homelessness, whatever. Because I think those would be the three things that I would look at if I were looking at your baseball card, which would be like, okay, does she have the raw talent? Yes. Does she have the money? We need to see. And how is she on the policy kind of specifics? And I guess the fourth thing I think you're doing a great job is you're leaning in and engaging at the grassroots level with your district, and you're not just running from Twitter or YouTube. You're actually out there, and I think that will pay off in the long run. But it's hard. I mean, it's a lot of time.
You have to run the grassroots. Like you have to talk to people. That's incredibly important. So I appreciate that, and you're so smart, and you have just such influence on politics and the Yang Gang. And so I really value you and your, where you stand on things. And I really, just a shout out, if you haven't watched his episode with Zach, you should absolutely watch it. I loved that episode, by the way. That was a great episode.
Yeah. It was so great hearing Zach's kind of behind the scenes perspective.
I hope you can do it again. I would love for Evelyn to give her position on the behind the scenes, like what that was like.
Oh yeah.
You can get her on. That would be amazing.
Yeah. I think my sense is she might be focusing on the kids and, all of the craziness with the lockdown. And she's not like a traditional spouse of a politician, like always out there kind of thing. But I think it was great when we had her on before. Also, like you, very genuine. I very much value that and authentic. So I'll keep trying to get Zach on again, and then also be good to get Andrew back on. He's always a good conversation.
And doing Zach at the same time.
Oh my God, that would be a cool one.
Yes,
that would be a cool one.
Yeah, at the same time.
Yeah, I'll ask. We'll see if we can make it happen.
Yeah. But thank you for having me on your channel. It means a lot to me.
Oh, Nell is reminding us that we should talk about, you have your own YouTube channel.
Yeah, I have. So I bring people on in my district, and just people that I think can inspire my district on every week. Wednesdays at 5:00. I actually have this guy coming on Wednesday who was a trumpet player for Marvin Gaye.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so they live in my district, and so every Wednesday at 5:00. It's just another way to show how cool my district is, and how many unique people there are, and how we can support one another. So and then the webinars are going to be coming every month starting this month. And it's basically to educate people in my district about the policies and what's happening and getting people connected. Because when I'm elected, we're going to have to do town halls, and I want people to really be able to connect with one another, have dialogue, conversations, regardless if you agree or disagree. I do think that having conversations is really important, and learning to listen to someone else that may disagree with you and be able to leave a conversation. Be like, you know what, I like them, but I just maybe respectfully disagree with them. Respectfully agree to disagree. And that's what I would like to see come back to politics, honestly, is it doesn't have to be like an attack on the person. I think that's like, we're not just our political stance. Totally. We're more than that. Totally. So we don't have to get dirty. We don't have to like talk negatively about one another. We can just disagree on this particular policy and agree on this policy.
Yeah, I think we absolutely need more of that. And we try to do that on this show, just kind of talk about stuff openly, and it's okay if we don't see things eye to eye on every issue. It saddens me to think about how we've gone into the this tribal world where anything for my candidate is perfect and anything for your candidate is just, terrible. We've lost that gray nuance that is life. That we try and teach our kids about. But hopefully with you running and making it to Congress, you can be part of that change, Aarika. And
that's the goal.
I look forward to having you back on again. And so, but for now, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
Bye, nerds.